Hey folks, I'm trying a slightly different angle today. Buenos, I should say, which is my code word for starting my reviews out here in slightly less sunny Andalusia today. It is a little bit overcast, which is no bad thing, I think, actually. It has been quite brutal recently and kind of kept me out of trouble for sure, right? Kept me indoors. So I didn't manage to make 2 books this week, not for any particularly good reason. That's simply what happened. But I have a review ready of the second Thomas Weber book that I've read, which is a successor to Hitler's First War, which sometimes strikes me as a little bit odd, is my most popular video so far. Okay, so we have the successor book to that, Becoming Hitler, The Making of a Nazi, published 2017. Okay, very detailed book, very big book, very interesting. What does it tell us? So in the first book, Weber does some excellent primary history research where he found the miraculously unbombed, undamaged memoirs, letters, diaries, records, right, of the List Regiment, which was the Bavarian regiment that AH served in the First War, volunteered into, of course, yes. And the consensus of that book really is that Hitler's presentation of his superheroic frontline experiences was something of a myth. He was, a rear echelon swine. I'm not sure if that's quite the right translation, but rear area swine is the same thing, right? So the point was that he spent the vast majority of his life in First World War out of fire, back at divisional HQ, regimental HQ, certainly running dispatches. I think he might have been fired on. I think when I did that review, I said he'd never been fired on. I think he was fired on in literally the first few days of the Battle of the Frontiers, but not for an extended period of time, right? So Weber kind of left it as, well, the book says that you cannot, Hitler's mythologizing of himself, that his experiences made him into a Nazi, and it did all of his comrades. Weber has a lot of evidence in the book about why that is not to be taken as gospel by any manner of means. This book expands on that point in many ways, and some of it is a little deep into the very specifics of, well, quite rightly, right, of the personalities and the micro-politics of Munich in 1918 to up until really it kind of gets to the point of the November, what was the Ludendorff putsch becomes the Hitler putsch later in his mythology, right? And most of that was fine. Some bits were a tiny bit sticky, I've got to be honest. But they were meant to carry you through because he paints a portrait of both the extreme left Soviet, social democratic, left revolutionary Munich, and then the reactionary Munich that comes after it. I think his sympathies are quite evident. That he does make a point of talking a lot about how it's, these Protestants from outside Bavaria who were the troublemakers, and the vast majority of all these various kind of loony parties, which is fine. And I think there is. I wish I knew more about Bavarian history, and I would actually be interested in looking into it a bit more, not breaking the TBRP promise to myself that I wouldn't buy any new books for this, right? Though I have bought a couple of books, a bit naughty, trips back to England. Anyway, and I think he's got some sympathies for how, he paints he doesn't want to kind of draw it out too much, but it's what could have happened if Germany hadn't gone the way it had? Could there have been a Bavarian, Austrian, Southern Catholic Germany? Maybe that would have been better. It is quite fascinating to do some sort of what ifs there. And one thing that really kind of one is reminded of quite a few times is that a lot of the first few years after the war were very, very, very hard for the civilians, because we were still doing the blockade, which we did until they kind of basically signed the treaty, which was fairly cruel, really, in retrospect, and caused an awful lot of hardship and embittered an awful lot of people. And also, you do kind of feel, why was there no attempt at any kind of occupation? Did we just close the door on the furnace and let it kind of cook, right? And that was in retrospect, that was very foolish, short-sighted kind of attitude. We kind of figured out somehow the Germans were going to sort themselves out without adult supervision, right? Which is a lesson learned in World War II occupation policy, obviously, kind of thing. So that's kind of interesting. He does also bring up very interesting things about Hitler's formation, the formation of Hitler's political ideology, which was originally and very much influenced by literally the people who gave him lectures when he was a propaganda officer. This guy Fader, quite influential. It was originally very much an anti-capitalist Jewish conspiracy. That was much more of his kind of thinking at the start, and it only became deadly and eliminationist when is it Goldhagen who says that, right? When it becomes allied with anti-Semitic, anti-Bolshevik prejudice and racial theory and all kind of these awful, terrible things. But there is certainly a sense, and of the evidence, I think is very well presented, that Hitler was some kind of socialist, or certainly kind of a fellow traveller in that direction immediately after the war, and does seem to have served the revolutionary government in Munich with enthusiasm and loyalty. And whether or not he did go to Kurt Eisner's funeral, do we really need to know that? I mean, it's quite clear that's where his sympathies ultimately lay, at least for a period. All other interesting stuff along the way in the kind of Weber sociology here, pun intended, historiography maybe, is stuff about the idea of a genius, which is a concept that bears a bit of thinking about, that what people thought and expected and hoped for from a genius, how they come from the lower class and they would be very sui generis and they would kind of fix all these problems, kind of a messianic thing. That's very much in there as well, and that's one of the things that Hitler rather consciously kind of tapped into, and there was a myth again he was trying to play. Ultimately, I guess a depressing book in the sense of what happened, that he went the way that he wanted to go. That's not very well expressed. He went the way that none of us wanted him to go, and that's the story that Thomas Weber wants to tell us, and he tells us very well, I think. Definitely interesting guy, very the writer, very good historian. He's a good writer. He does throw a few. There's sort of seeds of other books there that you can see. I mean, he's got some sort of gnomic statements about how if Germany had been more like Bavaria, then maybe this wouldn't have happened, etc., etc. Certainly a Bavarian. I don't think he was born in Bavaria, but he's certainly got a lot of sympathy for Bavaria. Interesting stuff. So glad I read it. 5-star rating. I guess a 5. I think it's very well done, very well written. Don't want to keep it. I wouldn't read this again, I don't think. Very happy to donate it, pass it on. Anyone interested in this period of history, about politics? Yes, that was another thing I wanted to say. Does also make you think about, in the light, not in the light of, is Farage and Reform fascist, though obviously they're not, very much not to my liking, but what makes someone become a politician? Why choose politics as a career? Weber will tell you that basically Hitler didn't really have a choice. I mean, the world would have been much better off if the army had kept him and he'd been able to sort of toddle along, following orders in that capacity. But he wasn't given the option, and he kind of saw politics really as a way to carry on what he wanted to do, which was talk at people and play with ideas and become an artist of some nature, fantasy about. Weber says a number of times his whole thing was, after the war, how can we make sure that Germany will never lose another war? How can we make sure it will be strong forever? very, very much his driving thing. And some people must go into politics because they are driven by, I was going to say ideology, but more altruism, faith, belief, vision. Yeah, maybe we should be a little bit careful about that, really. Yeah, okay, well, let's leave that there. Fascinating stuff, good book. The other book I thought I'd finish this week is the Bradbury. I'm struggling a bit. I am going to carry on. I suppose the thing is that I haven't really read Bradbury since I was a boy, and I was absolutely enchanted with him then, as I think many people are. And he's perfect for when you're a young person. I think he's the poetry, the kind of, I guess the mysticism, the originality of it all, the kind of lyricism of it all kind of enchants you, and it's very, very strong. As reading it later in life, it's work. I mean, he's poetic, right? And every sentence is poetic, or every paragraph has a bit of difficult imagery in it, or some kind of form of expression that you wouldn't necessarily think, and that's great, and that adds depth and beauty to the writing. That's great, but it makes actually kind of getting on with the story quite hard, and I need to sort of get past that, really. I think I'm sure there is something great in here, and I will pursue it, and I will finish it today. I won't finish it today. I'll give it a good go today, and hope to see you with a good review of that maybe in a week's time. Sunday seems to be my time. In terms of life catch up, it's not a great period. It's a very quiet period. I'm kind of trying to make it into a virtue where I have decided I'm setting myself some goals about living very quietly, very cheaply, quite minimally, at least for a while. And I think that's what I need to do in terms of my finances and maybe my head. That is, a bit boring, a little bit lonely. And I'm kind of get my head round that's what I need to do for the time being. So, and of course, books need to be part of that and part of my tool set at the moment to kind of get through this period of time, and so that's what I'll do. So I will say goodbye for now, guys. Give you all my encouragement about your own TBRP, and I hope to have a review of the Bradbury in a few days and then carry on. Okay, my friends, thank you, bye.